Hi guys, we will talk about regional and global strategy today. There is a bit of a misconception in the field of global strategy that perhaps it really has to be truly global, that you might need to be in a great deal of countries and markets and have your sales spread in every continent. At least that was the challenge that researchers Alan Rugman and Ellen Verbeek posed to the thesis by Tom Friedman, that the world is flat and we are getting more and more globalized. While this challenge and the idea of regionalization is valid, indeed, a lot of companies are much more successful in the immediate region, say European companies in the EU or American companies in North America or Chinese companies in Asia. We are seeing several challenges to this dichotomy of regional versus global. Well, one of the approaches was to actually not talk about globalization versus regionalization, but to say that we are somewhere in the middle. It's the idea of semi-globalization. And it also links to the fact that a lot of us, including the top executives, are overestimating how much globalized we are. For example, executives seem to overestimate how much trade is international as a share of GDP, or how many of the internet searches are local versus global. So that kind of global-only gap of exaggerated perceptions of globalization and reality is something that is stressed by the semi-globalization perspective. Now, more recently, we've seen new vocabulary in terms of what kind of globalization can we have today. So the most recent research in the last 10 years, in particular after the global financial crisis, has pointed to the quite distinct possibility and indeed reality of deglobalization. So GFC has shaken the world economy. Many countries have suffered from the crisis. Inequalities have increased, and international trade and investment have somewhat stalled. Not completely, but even before the corona crisis, we've seen much lower rates of growth of international trade and investment than we used to in, say, the golden age of globalization in the 1990s or even in early 2000s. So we see trends of potential deglobalization. Some analysts call it perhaps structural reshaping of globalization. In particular, we see a possible bifurcation of the global system into one centered around the US and perhaps countries with the rule of law, and then another centered around China with quite a distinct political economic system. And in particular in the area of technology, we see potentially two different systems being created, but perhaps in international trade and in other aspects as well. So we see challenges to globalization. Companies have to, in their global strategy or in their international strategy, understand these trends of continued importance of the regional, kind of reshaping of what regional means with trade agreements such as Trans-Pacific Partnership that spans continents from Latin America to Australasia to North America. So kind of rethinking a reshaping of globalization. We need to be aware that a lot of the globalization myths are overestimating how much we are globalized, so that's semi-globalization argument, and that we need to also consider the possibility of deglobalization as partly consequence of the Corona crisis, but also of the previous big crisis that we experienced in 2008-9, the GFC. Now, looking into the future, I would say, I would propose that I think we'll be getting re-globalized, and the exact form of that re-globalization will be important. So the re-globalization will be not just a return to the previous version of globalization before 2008. It will be something different, reshaped. I would call it e-globalization. And E means, I think, at least two or three things. First, what traditionally the E means in business, e-commerce, e-business, kind of digital reshaping of globalization. I think we might be traveling less physically, but we'll be much more connected, and we are digitally. The companies will be more and more embracing the digital business models. The role of technology will be increasing in international business, and we have to rethink global strategy as e-strategy, as digital strategy. Now, the second aspect of the E, I would say, would be ecosystems. And I think here we can think about that in both business and actually literal ecological terms. So increasingly, the ecosystems and platforms of interrelated complementary companies operating in large platforms and ecosystems that might be split globally into, I don't know, the China's sphere of influence and America's sphere of influence, or smaller systems of interrelated players. That will be crucial to strategizing in the international arena and your positioning in competition. And then I think ecosystems, we need to also take it literally that we are living in a world, and global strategy are linked to the idea of our world, of our Earth, as an environmental system. We are live creatures. There's other creatures in the world, and there's resources that sustain us. So I think there'll be a lot of rethinking in terms of energy, in terms of e-mobility, and we need to think about the environmental and energy underpinnings of our business systems. So we need to take the concept of ecosystem more literally, and think not just about business ecosystems, but about us being connected in the environmental systems. So these are my ideas about kind of new thoughts on global versus regional strategy.